Hi and welcome back to episode 8 of season 2 of the Canary Room. It's been a while since we've been here. Coming up on the show today, we'll go around the room, we'll see how the birds have developed since our last visit. We've got our favourite part of the show, the Redpoll Diaries. Very, very excited using the Redpoll Diaries today. We'll see Bird of the Week, but this week we've got 2 Birds of the Week. I couldn't decide between the 2 birds, so I thought I'd give them both the chance to showcase. We're also on the Canary Room Top Tips. We'll be looking at the early selection of the show team. So as we head into September now, we're looking at the first shows of the season coming up very, very quickly. So we start to look at the type of things that we're looking for when we put our show team together. We've got, we'll check in with the Razzers. It's been a while since we've seen them, and the Norwich too. And of course, we'll finish the show, as always, with question time. In the last episode of the show, we talked about how we went about selecting the birds that we'd retain. Now, we've been through that process with the cockbirds. You'll see behind me the 6 cages with 6 of our flighted cockbirds retained. So they're chosen for next year. They've molted out in their cages. They've all pretty much through the molt now. A couple of pin feathers around the eyes still to go. Great way of looking after the cockbirds that you want to keep for next year. So you can see there's no stress to them, there's no strain to them. They'll get baths on them on a weekly basis. They'll get a little bit of egg food on a weekly basis. And they can just concentrate now on getting ready for next season. Now, next breeding season, you know, we haven't even hit the show season yet, may feel a long time away. But it's the preparation that you do now and you do early which will ensure that you have a good season. So these birds don't have to worry, they don't have to fret, they don't have to stress by being in, you know, big flight cages. They're just in individual cages now, and we'll gradually get them fit and we'll build them up over the course of the next weeks and months, getting ready for next February, March time for breeding. We've done a similar thing with the hens, although the hens are in one big long flight cage, but what we are doing with the hens as well is we're giving them a weekly tonic. So the process of reproduction, of egg laying, will take stuff out of birds, and it's important that you help put it back in. So if you remember that these birds are captive bred birds, they exist in captivity as breeders. And hobbyists, we have the responsibility to provide them with what they need. So the hens are getting green food on a weekly basis, they're getting egg food on a weekly basis. We'll give them some egg food a little bit later on in the show. And they're also getting a weekly tonic, so that will help replace and replenish some of the vitamins and minerals that they've used through the breeding season. We've almost done our selection with the hens. We've not quite finished it yet. There's probably 1 or 2 hens in there that we'll still let go. So we've got about 7 or 8 hens in the fifes at least in there. So we'll have a little closer look at them now. You'll notice there's a bath constantly on the over-year hens. That's available every day. I refresh that for them, and they, like to take a bath. It's time for the first of this week's Bird of the Week. It's a new addition to the Canary Room. It is a delightful, absolutely delightful Isabel lesser redpoll cockbird. Let's have a look at him now. Been fortunate enough, as we'll see in the Redpoll Diaries coming up in a moment, to acquire a number of Isabel redpolls. They are an absolute thing of beauty for me. A colour mutation. You can see this is an over-year cockbird. When I'd bought this stud in, they haven't been colour fed very much for this year, so I have been colour feeding them, and as we get into the Redpoll Diaries in a moment, we'll show you how we're doing that. You can see he's got a nice little red plumage on his chest. Beautiful bird, an absolute delight. There is 6 of these in total. I plan to keep them all. They are gorgeous birds. There's I think 4 over-year birds and a couple of youngsters, a couple of this year's birds as well. So absolutely gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. We're similar in sex-link terms to cinnamons in the canaries that we know. So to produce a visual bird, you need a visual cock, a carrier. If you put this to a normal hen, you'd get carriers, or they'd be split for Isabel effectively. But he's absolutely stunning, this fella. Still very new to me, redpolls, as we know. So we've had them about 4 years in the canary room, as we know in the canary room diaries, the redpoll diaries rather. We've had mixed success with them. I think we'll be kind and say mixed success. But I'm not a quitter, and the plan here is to really go for them. So let's have a close look at this fella, and then it'll be time for the redpoll diaries. It's been suggested that we should rename the show the Redpoll Room, but it will always be the Canary Room first and foremost. It's time for the Redpoll Diaries. We've met this little fella here in Bird of the Week. You can see there's another young Isabel here in the middle, and that's this year's bred. It carries a blue ring, and then this is another one of the birds that we brought in on the end here, which again is blue ringed. I love the fact that the chest colour's dark all the way through. They're a relatively new thing for me, redpolls, as we know, so I'm still getting an understanding of them. We'll have a look in a moment at the new birds that we've brought in. We're in a couple of cages behind us, behind Dan. I'm looking at this bird. It's got decent size on it. I'm looking at its feather. I'm going to suggest it's possibly a buff bird. What I like about it is the darkness around the middle of the chest here. I really, really like that. If we have a look at the moment with the normal birds, we'll see that there are still some of the young in nest feather, and then there's some young, as this one is, that have molted through. So they haven't really been in training cages, which is why they're twirling and moving around a little bit. A couple of weeks' time is the first show of the season, which is the Cheshire Classic. I may take a box of redpolls out. I may just take 2 or 3 out. I don't know yet. We'll see how we get on with them. Might be nice to just put them on the bench and see how they get on. So, without further ado, let's have a close little look at these 2, these 3, and then we'll meet the rest of the redpoll team. So I mentioned in the last episode some exciting news about the Redpoll Diaries, and it's news that we've realised you know who you are, the person I have to thank for being able to land effectively an entire redpoll stud. So I bought in 30 birds, the vast majority of which are babies. There's a few adult birds, probably about 10 adult birds maybe, and then the rest are babies. We can see in the flight cages behind us here that there's still some in their young nest feather. You can see there's a couple of Isabels here. There's 6 Isabels in total, which I'm really looking forward to. I'm giving them millet. I'm going to give them some egg food in a minute, and then we'll put the baths on, and then I'll show you how I make up the water solution for them. So I'm colour feeding these at the moment. You'll notice as well there's nothing below them in terms of, we've got our goldfinches at the bottom. The trio of goldfinches there. I've got another cock on order coming in, so we'll have 2 pairs of goldfinches. And we talked about what we were going to do in the canary room, and that plan's getting more and more firmed up now. So just behind Dan, on the back wall where we've seen Bird of the Week, we'll have some more cages and flight configuration just lifted up off the wall. So we've got a little bit of remodelling to do. The plan with the redpolls is to retain probably between 8 and 10 pairs. Now I say between 8 and 10. I've got potentially a pair of siskins coming in. We know I'm a big fan of the siskin as well. So, what does that mean overall in the canary room? Well, different things. Really, you know, we're obviously going to build some more cages, so we'll have a bit more cage space. But then we're going to have to look at some of the other inhabitants in here as to whether they stay or they go. Some of the reds have already gone. We'll see what's left in a moment. The Norwich is still here for the time being, although we'd probably look to retain a pair or maybe even 2 pairs of them, or maybe a trio. And the Fifes obviously are the mainstay. So the Fifes are absolutely, you know, we're fixed with the Fifes. We'll retain probably 12 cocks and 18 hens again. It's worked well for us this year. But on the redpolls, I'm delighted to have them. I'm going to do a selection process with them, so there will be some available from me. If anybody's interested, drop me a line, info@thecanaryroom.tv. But they're absolutely beautiful, these birds. And pop the millet in now for them. They've got seed in there. I'm going to pop the baths in as well. So while I'm doing that, you enjoy them bathing, and then we'll give them a little bit of egg food, and we'll show how we make the red mix up in the water. So we've got our egg food mix here. You can see that we've got some little petit pois in. I'm giving this once a week to the birds, just to help them through the molds. Nice as a soft food for them. So we'll give some to the redpolls now. We should see them enjoying that. I'm not going to put any colour food in it because that's going in the water, and we'll show how that's done in a moment. So with any luck, we can see there's already one of the Isabels has taken one now. There should be. We'll give some to the 5 hens, and then we'll work round the room and give it to all of the different birds. Just a finger draw through, but we'll do that a little bit later on. So I'm going to pop some little baths in while we watch those enjoy the egg food. I'll pop some baths in. I'll just use dishes actually in the British cages. I find them unwilling really to come out of the cage into wire baths. So I'm using just little dishes that you put under plant pots really, and they're ideal for the birds. They make a little bit of a mess, but it's a beauty to watch actually. It's really, really enjoyable. I think you'll see I'm smitten with the redpolls, and I'm delighted to have them. It's going to be a challenge for me to do a selection process. Obviously the over-year birds are easy to sex. This year's birds are less easy to sex. You can do something called DNA feather testing, so you can just take a feather and send it off and have it DNA tested. So I may end up doing that just to ensure that I don't keep a load of cocks or a load of hens. But either way, I'm delighted to have them, and hopefully this will see the kick-start of the redpolls in the room. So while you're watching them eat, I'm going to get the baths ready for them, and then we'll make up their water solution. So as I mentioned earlier, it's simply a little plant pot dish, so it goes underneath the plant pot. Just pop some fresh water in, and then if I pop this in the cage, we should, I'll pop one in the cage below, we should very shortly see them bathe. The redpolls have, because their babies have been so small, redpolls have provided me no end of fun when they first came into the Canary room about 3 or 4 weeks ago, because despite the fact that all the cage holes were blocked, every day it seemed we'd have a Houdini redpoll and they'd escape, and I've spent a significant amount of time each morning trying to catch them, which for anybody looking outside the shed was a great deal of fun. Let me reassure you, for me it was less fun. Let's watch them bathe. So I mentioned in the last episode of the show that I'd feed, the egg food normally, or the red food rather, in the egg food, But I did say that when you've got a lot of birds in cages, it can mean that not all of them get the opportunity to colour up properly. There is approximately 15 birds in each of these 7-foot flight cage here at the moment. So if I just put the red in the egg food, there's a strong chance that they wouldn't colour up. And what I wanted to make sure with, particularly the over-year birds that I've got in here, that I knew whether they were cocks or hens. So this is ideal for the situation. So it's just an old 1.5 litre cloudy apple juice. I've got the Carophil red in here. I'm sure you should really measure it out, but I do it by eye. So I'll sprinkle in some of the granules. You can see the water starting to colour already as the granules go in. What I'll do quickly, I'll just move out of shot for a second. I should have done this before. Is I'll pop the lid on. You can see it's a lightish orange colour at the moment. And you can now see it's a deep red colour. So I'm going to go and wash my hands because it looks like I've shot myself. I'll wash my hands quickly and I will give this to the redpolls. We'll give it to the reds, and we've got a different mix to give to the Norwich. Hands are clean. I'm getting soaked by the birds bathing behind me. We'll give this solution, as I mentioned before, and you'll notice it's done by design, not default. There's no fifes or any other birds below the birds here, and we're feeding colour food on the bottom rows of the cages here where there's fifes above. The drinkers are to the far side of the shed, and it's all designed and intended to ensure that none of the colour food goes anywhere near the fife birds, because if they get colour food on, they'll be spoiled. So we'll pop this into the drinkers now for the redpolls, and then we'll go back around the room. It's been a while since we've seen them, and we've just given them some colour food now. We've moved some of the reds on just to clear a little bit of cage space. We've got 5 left there, a couple of intensive by the looks of it, and a couple of non-intensive, and possibly a rose as well. We'll have a look at one of those in our second, or in our canary room flashback in a short while. It's one of the hens from last year that's bred some nice birds for us. The colouring up lovely. You'll notice the cage floor in here is slightly different. I've been trialling out some cat litter. It seems slightly ironic to put cat litter in bird cages, but that's what I've done anyway. So just to see, because they're difficult to get down to these cages, just to see whether it's any good or not. So far seems okay. It's wood based, it's quite heavy. There's not a great deal of dust from it, so we'll see whether we continue with that little experiment or not. But you can see the reds, there's one still to colour up a little bit, but the vast majority of the reds have taken on a really nice deep red colour now. Some of them have got nice white flights, others haven't. We know what the reds are in the room for. They're here to feed the Norwich. You know, we may do some crossing with redpolls in the future, but they're not here in a show capacity. How many I'll keep, I'm not sure. As I say, some have already moved on. There's 5 left. Whether I keep a cock and a couple of hens just as feeders, I'm really not sure. But difficult to film for Dan because they're in the bottom cages, but he's a talented cameraman, so he can manage it. So it's time for the canary room top tips. And this episode's top tips are selecting the show team. Now you'll notice in the cages behind me that all of the fifes are in pairs. There's a different argument to say, should you keep the birds singularly, should you keep them in pairs? Ideally, I'd normally like to keep them in single cages. The way things are at the moment with bringing in some redpolls, there's not a great deal of single cages available in the canary room, so I've got them in pairs. What I've done over the last few weeks though is kept an eye on which are cocks and which are hens. And so in the majority of the instances in the cages behind, they should be a cock and hen. And that just means they're less likely to fight and they're less likely to pluck and less likely to pull. One of the other things I'm conscious of, particularly at this time of year, is that the birds are coming through the molt now. I don't really want to move them to a different part of the room. And the reason I don't want to move them is there's a chance they'll go back into the molt. So one of the first things I do when I'm selecting the show team is I'll look at the birds in their stock cages. Now you can only see them side on in the stock cages, and that's one of the limitations. And what you also can't tell when they're in the stock cage is their temperament in a show cage. Now we've seen before that we do hang training cages on the front of the cages for the birds to run in and out of and get used to. First show's about 2 weeks away. It's a CBS show, so I'll use it really as a training show just to get the birds out, just to see them on the bench, to see how they behave. But over the next 2 weeks, we'll really ramp up the show training for them. And that means they'll spend half a day at a time on the shelves just to my right. So one of the things that we've got to keep in mind when we're selecting the show team is the model. That's the most important thing that you've got to keep to. So you're looking at birds which you believe are close to the model. And there's one or two in the shed, I'm pleased to say. In fact, there's probably more than one or two in the shed. There's birds I really like. There's birds that still aren't finished. The second thing that you've got to keep an eye on is the general overall health of the birds. Showing will stress birds out. Show season is a fantastic time of the year. It's great to meet lots of new people, but ultimately the good birds that you've bred, you want to be able to breed from for next year. So keep an eye on the health of the birds. Birds, like anything really, will go up and down in different things. They'll catch a bug and they won't be in great health. You do not want to show an unfit bird or a bird that's not being well, because it will end, believe me, it will end in disaster. So when you're selecting your show team, I start from the top. So I'll start with the clear yellow cocks. I'll look and say, okay, have I bred any clear yellow cocks in the shed? I'll put them in show cages. I think there's possibly one, maybe two clear yellow cocks that we've got this year. One just in a cage behind me here, it's not quite finished. Another in a cage just over to the right there. I'm 50-50 whether it's a cock or a hen. It's got good colour, but it may well be a hen. So obviously I wouldn't want to show it as a cock bird. You're then looking at some of the clear buff hens. We'll pull one out in a minute to have a proper look at and look at the kind of thing that you're looking for. And what I'll also do is I'll pull a clear buff hen that's not quite finished, and you can see the difference between the two. So without further ado, let's do that now. I'll catch up a couple of the clear buff hens. We'll pop them in the training cages over there and we'll have a closer look at them. So we've just caught up 3 clear buff hens that we've bred this year. The bird furthest away from me is probably the furthest advanced through the molt. The second 2 birds here are sisters and have still got a way to go. You won't be able to see probably from that distance, but there's pins around the head and there's still some back feather to come, particularly on the bird here. What you're looking for, start at the top. So you're looking for a really good strong head on the bird. So you're looking for a nice rise in front of the beak. You're looking for a roundness, and then you're looking for a nice clean break in the neck, even in your buff birds. Quite hard to get on a buff bird because obviously there's a lot of feather there. Lovely position showing on these birds, particularly the bird in the middle. It's upright, that's what you want. You don't want it leaning over the perches too much. because it will look fronty then. You want a jauntiness. If we see this bird on the end here, there's a real jauntiness to her. She's got strong head on her, nice across the back as well, good width on her. I think this is a bird that will probably go out early for me. One of the things I won't do with hens is overshow them, so they'll probably get a maximum of 2 to 3 shows. I mean, I'll be careful about what shows they go in, because ultimately their value is in the shed. So I want them to do well on the show bench, but I want them to come back here and to be able to breed for me next year. And it's one of the considerations about showing. That bird's showing nice position. It's lovely and jaunty across the perches. It's not too big, it's not too long, but it's got certain amount of body on it. And when I say body, I of course mean feather, and not like myself, real body. And that's important, because what you want the bird to do is to retain its shape whilst it's being judged. These two birds behind me here are nice birds. You can see they're not finished yet. They're short, they've got neat wings. They've got more to come on the back. This one's pulling tight now, and it looks flatter on the back. Now, it looks a very different bird in the stock cage, and that's what I was talking about earlier on. It's important when you're selecting your show team that you look at them in these cages here. One of the other things that's important that you do is you handle them. Now, I haven't handled my birds a lot. I'm hoping for a natural steadiness in them. Famous last words for camera. But if I pull this bird here, you can see that she's not got spooked. It's a nice bird, this. It's got nice position, it's a nice size, it's not too big, but it's got body and volume. It's nice across the shoulders, it's got a really nice head, and it stands up well. It's not a show winner, I don't think, but it should do okay on the bench for me. So I'll pop her back up there. If I was to judge these birds, as I look at them now, I'd judge them in that order, 1, 2, 3. This bird here is quite nervous. Now, these birds are actually the same age, but this one is still quite far behind that one. And that can be strange with nestmates. They hatched and were reared at the same time, but they're not as far advanced forward. So we've had a look at some clear buff hens. We'll have a look at some clear yellow hens now, and we'll look at the difference between a buff and a yellow on the show bench. So we put the buffs away. We've got a couple of clear yellows now. In fact, this bird here isn't a clear. It's got a light mark on its feather, on its wing. And it's a real challenge for the show bench, and I know from a judging perspective. So I know that this bird is actually a ticked or 10% bird because it's got a dark mark on its feather, but it doesn't always show that feather, and particularly when it's settled, its back feather comes over and it's very difficult to see. And what that means, if I was judging this bird, I'd look at it and say it looks like a clear. So I'd be looking for the dark mark first and foremost as to whether or not I was going to run class it. If I was looking for the dark mark, what I'd normally do is blow gently on the bird to try and reveal the feather. And of course, what that does is it disturbs the bird. And it's a real predicament when you're judging. You want to give the birds the absolute best chance possible. Your responsibility as a judge is to ensure that they're in the right classification. So I can see the feather's quite prominent now because the bird's running a little bit, and I can see it on its back wing. If I was to blow on this bird gently, you can see it's not as steady as the bird here. If I was to blow on this bird, you can see I've disturbed its feather pattern and its feather shape, and I've unsettled the bird and it's not showing its wings well. And it's one of the challenges with the lighter mark birds that you've got to think about. And I'm not saying you should never show a bird with a mark on, absolutely not. And this bird, you know, depending on how it finishes up, may well make the show team, but it is a consideration. And it's also something to bear in mind when you're back at the end of the day and you're looking at your birds and they look fantastic on the bench, and you look and you think, oh gosh, why hasn't that done any better? And one of the reasons can be is when it's been worked by the judge, when it's been moved by the judge, it can race. And it's one of my other top tips for show selection and also show training. Handle your birds as much as you can. Get them steady. Ensure that when you're looking at the birds, that they show themselves to their very best. And that's really, really important. So, clear yellow hen here, I quite like. She's a sweet little bird. I think nice and up on her back. She do with potentially a little bit more on the back, but she's got a good strong head on her, as has her brothers and sisters, so that's come through the line. That's important for me. Final thing now on show selection, we'll just have a couple look at a couple of other birds, and we'll have a look at some of the dark birds just to see the contrast. So I'll pop these two away, we'll get a couple of the dark birds out. So I brought a couple of buff birds out for us to have a look at. Now both of these birds I think are going to make the show team. One of our other top tips is show birds that are finished and ready. The temptation is to show birds that aren't quite finished, and you'll see particularly in the earlier shows birds with lots of pin feathers round the eyes and they're not quite finished off. As a judge, you can only judge the bird in front of you. You can't judge its potential of what it might look like in 3 or 4 weeks time. You're there to judge what it looks like now. So if I look at these two birds, the green buff hen behind me here is not far away at all, and we'll finish her off with some spraying over the next week or so. The heavily variegated buff cockbird, which will also make the show team, has got some real potential, but he is probably 4 or 5 weeks away from being show ready, and that means he'll miss some of the earlier shows and probably not hit the show bench until November. That's important when you've got your show team. So you're selecting a team, and I'll select around about 20 birds that I believe have got the calibre to compete. I don't believe all of them will be show winners, but I believe they've got the calibre to compete. So I'll put them out. The team will be, as I say, 18 to 20 strong, but I'll probably only show around a dozen each time. And so some birds will come in and out of the team in the same way in football. You know, some players come in and have a good run and then they go out again. And that's the same way that I'll treat the birds. So I like this green buff hen behind me. She's got plenty to like about her. This buff cock bird will be a lovely bird in a few weeks' time. So to recap on our top tips for selecting the show team, work down the classifications. So look at your clear yellow cocks, look at your clear buff hens, your clear yellow hens, etc, etc, your 10%, write the way down, and judge your birds individually. So try and put birds up together as I've done today. You know, if you've got 3 buff hens, clear buff hens in the shed, then put them together, view them together. You know, if you've got a couple of clear yellow hens, view them together. I have got another green buff hen, and really I should have put her up here. Look at your birds in the cages, in the show cages. You know, they all look like world beaters in stock cages. What do they look like in here? Handle them as much as you possibly can. So if I pick this bird up here, you can see it's still steady-ish. Look for the features that you want. A nice strong head, that starts the bird off. A nice nip in the neck, up on its legs. You want to see some leg, you don't want them too far over the perches. But most of all, enjoy it. You know, your birds will develop, they'll get better with experience, so don't be afraid to get them out on the show bench. As I say, I'm looking at using a CBS show in a couple of weeks' time as a training exercise for them, really, just to get them used to having other birds around. And it'll do well for me as well to see what else is going to be out on the bench later throughout the year. That's this week's top tip. We haven't seen these guys for a long time now. The Razzers that we bred, we lost one unfortunately, so we had 6 young. We've got 5 now. We've still got the cock and both the hens. it looks like there's a couple of yellows, maybe 3 yellows in there, and maybe a couple of buffs. Can't tell yet which are cocks or hens. It's a couple that look a little bit henny and a couple that have got an intensity which would lead me to conclude they're probably cock birds. With the razzers, we know that they were brought in as feeders for the redpolls. They didn't really get the chance to feed redpolls, as we know. I'm undecided as to what I'm going to do with them this year. Whether I may just retain a couple of hens and a cock as feeder birds, or whether I may retain a couple of older fife hens that have been stunning feeders for me. So I don't mind the razzers at all, to be fair, but I'm not sure, as we've got all the redpolls now, I'm not sure whether they will retain their place in the canary room moving forward. They're slightly smaller than the fifes, so, you know, ideal really as feeders for the redpolls, and I know my redpoll mentor Alan Hoary uses them extensively. So I don't know, time to think, but they are, you know, a very, very sweet little bird, and it's a first for us this year in the canary room. Never kept them before, never bred them before, so to end up with 5, I'm quite pleased with. So it's time. Yeah, Dan's getting involved in the show again. Come on, calm down, sunshine. Yeah. So it's time for the canary room flashback. We saw earlier on the reds. This bird we met, in the Christmas, I think, of 2016. We were unsure whether he was a cock or a hen. He's definitely a cock. He is one of the only sort of flighted birds I've retained. I'll probably run him with his one of his daughters this year. Nice buff cock. You can see the colour on him is a strange colour, to be fair. He's not as dark red as I'd probably hoped for, but I'm not showing these birds, and he's pretty to look at. He's got a little bit too much yellow feathering in his wings, really, to be any kind of show bird. But nice bird, and he's produced some really nice vigour in the young, which is important. We'll have a little look at him, and then we will pop some egg food on the birds, and we'll take a little look at the Norwich. Mentioned it earlier on in the show, we gave the redpolls some egg food. I'm just going to give the fifes some now. What I'm not going to do at this time of year, I'd normally put the finger drawer up there, but I'm not going to, for the simple reason that it gives another chance for mite to harbour. So I'm just going to push it through the front doors, cage doors to start with, and it just means that mite will find it very difficult to get underneath it. We've got 30 cages in total on this back wall. In fact, there's 36, I can't count. So I'll just pop this through. At this time of year, a finger drawer is enough. Once a week is enough. It's just to help the birds through the molt more than anything else. So just to give them a little bit of variation in the diet. So I'll pop these in and we'll watch them enjoy it. We haven't seen them for some time now in the canary room. It's our family of Norwich. You can see they're just enjoying some egg food here. I've caught a couple up and we'll have a look at those in the cages in a moment. Relatively successful year with the Norwich. Half a dozen young out of a couple of hens, which is not a bad return. So quite pleased with that. We'll have a look at the ones in what we've got in the flight cage, and then coming up in a moment, we've caught, as I say, we caught a couple up, and first time they've been in cages, show cages. They're not Norwich show cages. They do have some Norwich show cages, but it just gives you an idea of how they look. So we've got a couple of buffs here. First time in any kind of show cage. ticked buff here, lightly marked buff, and then 50-50 I'd say. Probably maybe more heavily variegated than variegated. In the stock cage there's a couple of yellows as well, so we've possibly bred 2 yellows and 4 buffs this year, which I'm quite pleased with. Overall quality of them is okay. I think this is probably the better of the 2 birds, certainly a bit fuller. Difficult at the moment because neither are really showing themselves. Plan with the Norwich, to be decided really. I think you know, the Fifes we know are definitely a mainstay of the Canary room moving forward. The Norwich require reds to feed them, so whether we'll retain the entire stud of Norwich is still up in the air, so there's some decisions to be made over that. We may just keep a couple of pairs again as we did this last year, and keep a couple of red hens. It's all about sort of pleasure and cage space. I do like the Norwich, they're a lovely bird, a really lovely bird, and I've enjoyed having some young Norwich this year. Already got quite a bit of demand for the young, so I'll obviously make my selection, and then most of the remaining birds will leave the Canary room. But as I say, at the moment I'm not 100% certain as to whether I'm going to keep them all. With the goldfinches that we've got, the ideal scenario is that we'd, you know, pair a goldfinch over one of these, but I want to breed the goldfinches straight in the first instance. You know, we could pair a redpoll with a Norwich, although we'd probably be better doing a redpoll with a red or a razor because they're slightly smaller. So we'll see. We'll see what happens with the Norwich, but they are a thing of real beauty, I think. And I'm not disappointed with the quality this year. And there's some nice birds, as I say. I think this is the better of the 2. But this bird here is not a bad bird either. Take a closer look at these, and then we'll finish the show with question time. It's the part of the show that we get an awful lot of feedback from, which is very much appreciated. Thank you. It's question time. So the question today, it comes in from Andy Wilson. Andy, thanks for getting in touch with the show. Andy's emailed us. You can too, at info@thecanaryroom.tv, or alternatively you can message us through Facebook or write a comment on our Facebook page. Andy has asked, how do I get my birds quickly and successfully through the molt? It's a great question, Andy. If I knew all of the answers to it, all of my birds would be through the molt now. So if we think about the molt and what it is, it's an annual replacement of feathers. So with your young birds, it's basically about the losing their nest plumage, and we've seen it with the redpolls earlier, we've still got some in nest feather, and then gaining their adult plumage. If we look at the Fifes behind me, we can see that the birds have got pins around their eyes, they're still not finished. So what brings on the molt? Well, it's a natural phenomenon. It's assisted by the reduction in daylight hours. So we know we've got the timer on here. On the 1st of August, we dropped it down to the winter timing. So the lights come on at 6 in the morning, they go off at 4. I will pull that back to 3. So they've got about 9 hours of daylight over the winter months. So that's one of the first things to do, is to keep the lights consistent. Now, particularly if you think about September, we've had some god-awful weather. We've had some real rain and wind and horrible greyness and darkness, and then we've had some fantastic sunshine. So weather outside is it's, you know, ever changing, so you want to try and keep things in the bird room as constant and as managed as possible. That's why a lighting rig I think is an essential part of any canary room. So adjust your lighting in the first instance. Give plenty of baths. I give mine baths once a week as an absolute minimum, twice if I can get in the canary room. The third tip I would say is spray. A little secret for you now, I'm using something which is pure tea tree oil. Now I will put 1 drop into half a litre of water. It doesn't need any more than that. It's a great way to bring a shine on the birds, to help them plume. It'll also keep any nastiness at bay, so any little bugs on them at bay. I won't spray them in the cages. You'll notice some of the cages have got little bits of black on where I have sprayed them in there in the past. It's mould and it's mildew and it's not nice, so I take them out, I put them in a training cage and give them a really good spray, Andy, and that will help that preening, bring on the preening for them. That will help them come through the molt. Some birds, and I've got a little blue here behind me, in fact let's take it out now and we'll have a little look at it. You would say it was one of the later birds I bred. It's a lovely little bird and it will probably make the show team, but Andy, let me tell you, it's been very difficult to get through the molt. You can see that it's halfway up its back that it's molted, but you can tell there's a different colour of feather on it, so you can see the blue and then there's a brown almost through the middle. Now I will continue to spray this bird to encourage it through the molt. Its half sister, which was bred the same way last year, had exactly the same challenge. His half sister did very well on the show bench. It was a class winner. I think this bird will do well as well. It's a sweet little bird, but it needs an awful lot of spraying. Now I will start that in earnest over the next couple of weeks. The other thing that we need for the molt is a cold snap. So one of the things, although we've had a great deal of rain and wind, what we haven't had as yet is a real frost and cold, and that again, it's something to do with the nature taking its course. That will finish the birds off beautiful. So you'll hear fanciers say, I need a frost to finish them off. I need a cold snap to finish the birds off. They don't mean finish them off as in them fall off the perch. They mean finish them off as in get the feathers just hardened off on them, and that's what you're looking for. Andy, the very best of luck to you. I hope that answers your question. That's all we've got time for today. As always, thanks for watching. You can get in touch with the show, info@thecanaryroom.tv. You can contact us on Facebook and Instagram too. Until next time, take care. Yes, she did. Yes, she did. Mary had a little lamb. Its fleece was white as snow.
We are rolling, but...
Oh, are we?
Yeah.
Aha! Action! I've burst your eardrums. Cut!